This is part 3 of talking about the acute phases of a COVID infection. In part 1, we talked about sort of how you get a COVID infection and the 6 different stages that are directly a part of that acute infection. We talked about the viral load in part 2 and the impacts of changes in the viral load over time as COVID has mutated. And in part 3, we're going to talk about a sort of nuanced phase of COVID infections, which is going to be persistent infections, chronic infections, rebound infections, viral persistence, and what that means and how that interacts with the COVID ecosystem, essentially. So this is a really nice conceptual model that I lifted from a paper that shows the period of infectiousness from a typical COVID infection. So this top one is going to be like a standard COVID infection, such that I showed you above. So you're going to be increasing in viral load. You're going to be infectious for a period of time, and then you'll be decreasing and you'll be non-infectious in that period of time. Not a perfect figure here because you'd expect this to be lower than the initial infection range or the initial infectiousness range. So not a perfect graph, but it gives you the concept there. You can have a persistent infection, also known as a chronic infection. So this is where you take a very, very long time to actually shed the infection, to stop having it, essentially, to have your body fight it off and eliminate it from your system. So you get infected with COVID and it just sort of hangs around for a very long time. This can be upwards of years, even longer. The reason this happens can just be random. It could be that you have an impaired immune system. So someone with HIV, for example, that was the person that had the 776-day infection. Yep, 776-day infection. That person actually had HIV. So that prevented them from being able to adequately fight off the COVID, so that it just never got cleared. So that's a persistent or chronic infection. You could have a reinfection. So you can have an infection with COVID, be infectious, and then you get infected with COVID again with new variant, new strain of the virus that your body doesn't recognize, and you can be sick and infectious once more. This can happen very quickly after infection, after you clear it. There's no time period where it's like, oh yeah, you're definitely not going to get infected with another COVID variant. You can get it as soon after the infection as you cleared it. But you can also get something called a co-infection, where you get multiple variants of COVID at the same time, which is why if you are infected with COVID and then someone else in your household also gets infected with COVID, because we aren't able to do at-home genomic sequencing, we can't tell if you have the exact same virus as your partner, the person you live with. So you could actually have two different viruses, and then you can infect each other with that virus or that variant. So you could have an XFG variant, your partner has a BA3.2 variant to keep it in current times, and you guys could exchange variants with one another, and then you have a co-infection at the same time where you have multiple variants infecting you at the same time. And this can actually do something called recombination, where these variants merge together because they're not perfect replicators. So they actually can share and splice variant information together and create a brand new virus. So that's something that you need to be aware of. So you shouldn't just be like, oh, we're both sick with COVID, we'll just share air and not worry about it. This is why you should still isolate from one another, assume you don't have the same variant. And then there's something called viral rebound. So viral rebound is when you have a period of infectiousness, the virus is almost cleared but not quite cleared, and then for whatever reason, due to stress and impaired immunity, just bad luck, the virus then rebounds within your system. This can also be caused by antiviral medications. So you're on the medication, you end the course of the medication, and then the virus comes back up. But it can also happen without taking an antiviral medication. But that's sort of where a lot of people know the word viral rebound from, is from Paxlovid. We'll cover that in a few minutes. But first, let's talk about these two different phases of long-term acute infection. So first, we have persistent chronic infection. So this is that first scenario right here where the virus is never fully cleared to a meaningful degree, and you actually remain at infectious levels for an excessive length of time. So that's one form of a long-term acute infection, which can take a very long period to clear, anywhere from 90 days to like a year or beyond. And then you have persistent rebound infections, which is this other form over here where your virus is partially cleared to levels that put you below that level of infectiousness to others, but the virus has found residence within some region of your body to persist and then reemerge over time. So different places it can house itself. Most often it's in your GI tract, where it can just sort of take up residence there. But we've also found that it can persist in the lungs, in the lung tissue. It can also persist in your salivary glands, in your nasal epithelium. There's been studies where it's persisted in the eyes for long periods of time. So you have chronic eye infections. So a part of persistent rebound infection would be viral persistence, which is another word to just say that the virus has not cleared, that it's just sticking around in some cavity in your body. And then because of that, it can reemerge for basically one of two reasons. It could reemerge during a period of stress. So this could be you got sick with a different virus, and because your body is actively fighting that, and your immune system is not as strong as it could be, COVID's allowed to reemerge because it's not being suppressed. So that could be something just like a high stress period in your life, whenever we're doing a lot of physical activity or mental activity where we're really stressed about something like taking a really big test. This can weaken our immune system, and that could allow it to, again, reemerge. Or really just over time, because it's going to be interacting with your immune system here and there, and it's going to be persistently replicating over time, albeit at these very low levels. It's going to pick up mutations from fighting your body for a long time over time. That's a weird way to say that, but for a long period of time, your body's fighting off COVID, that long-term COVID infection. So it's able to pick up mutations that could be beneficial to staying within your body. But then it could gain enough mutations where it's able to reinfect you, so evade your prior immunity against it. So you get reinfected by a virus that's already within you, that's never left. And then you could be once more infectious to others. I think we saw a recent example of this in Idaho. I'll talk about that in a second. But these are sort of the two different ways that we can have cryptic lineages, where a person just never clears the infection at all, and you just remain infectiousness at high levels, so you're chronically sick. Or you have this persistent rebound infection where you cleared it, but it didn't fully clear it, and then it sort of came back up again. And that's where our cryptic lineage trackers come into play. One of them is Mark Johnson, this gentleman right here, who it goes by Solid Evidence. So he tracks COVID variants within the wastewater, and he's always looking for not the current sequences, but the sort of weird sequences that have garnered lots and lots of mutations over time. So one of them for a chronic infection would be Nebraska variant right here. So you can see this is the spread of genetic diversity within the COVID population in the major variants. This is how far away this Nebraska variant has mutated over time. So a person that has a very long-term chronic infection can garner very high levels of mutations, which can create a very distinct variant for that one person. And this one is the longest COVID infection that they've seen. So this is about 4 years. So it could be a chronic infection. It could be a persistent rebound infection. But because it keeps popping up, I'm guessing it's probably a chronic infection. And this person right here, it's their infection derived from a B.1.2 variant, so way back in the day. This was circulating predominantly around March 2021, so this is very unlikely to be like a new infection. So because it's so far out of circulation, this means that they've been infected for about 4 years at this time, and this was about like 9 months ago when Mark Johnson posted this, so we're probably coming up on 5 years at this point. And then, so why does this even matter? Well, we just have to look to Idaho and the Coeur d'Alene facility there. So in our most recent summer wave of 2025, there were very high levels, abnormally high levels of COVID detected in the wastewater there. Mark Johnson took it upon him to be like, oh, maybe this is a cryptic lineage. Let's test it. So during this first spike, he tried to reach out to the facilities there to get samples. They weren't able to get samples before it started going down and out of circulation. But then it popped right back up again. So as soon as they were having that huge signal, he was able to get samples, test it, and he found something interesting. He found that 96% of the sequence is a cryptic BQ1.1 lineage. So Mark Johnson believes this is all coming from one person. I vehemently disagree with that for everything that we know. So, for the people that we have been able to find that have had these chronic long-term infections, they actually shed at very low levels. So, it's very unlikely that one person would shed that much, particularly because it's a 42,000 person facility. So, because the population is so large, it's very unlikely that one person would generate that high of a signal and be shedding that much COVID to really have it at that high of a level, because they do a pepper mild model virus normalization. So they'd literally have to be shitting all day, every day, and they'd probably die from that. But clearly they didn't, because it went up, went down, went back up again. So that's a clear sign of a persistent rebound infection when you have it up, down, up. So what I think actually happened is that this person had a long-term infection. It was then able to evade their prior immunity, reinfect them, and then they infected other people within the community with that infection, and it spread rapidly because it's not been seen in the circulation for a while. So people don't have a recent immunity to this, either through vaccination or natural infection, or they just never got infected with it way back then when it was circulating. So because that happened, and then also because the older variants have a better detection on how we actually measure PCR, we ended up seeing a very high signal because it is actually better able to be detected with how we're currently measuring the virus than with current variants that are not as well detected. We actually have shown that there's vast underestimation of the COVID wastewater concentration with current variants than with older variants. So I think all of this is a very clear sign that it was a reinfection that became reinfectious to other people, that spread within the community very rapidly, and then that's why we saw what we saw. So why have I gone over all of that? Well, it's because we have something sinister that happens. You can get a superinfection, which is another phrase for a co-infection, which just means that you're simultaneously infected with different COVID variants. And as shown here, there's a traditional infection, you get COVID, it replicates and mutates, and then spreads to other people. But you can also get a co-infection of two different variants. So here they're doing Delta and Omicron. They can splice together and create a hybrid virus of these two viruses. So at first, this was thought to be a very rare phenomenon, but with COVID, this happens quite frequently. So here's some examples. So XFG, our Stratus variant, is from a chronic infection from BA2 that garnered mutations, became BA2.86, and then went to JN1, and then some other variants that split from JN1, then recombined to become XFG. And they're not just integrating within the vast wilds, they're integrating by people being infected with more than one COVID variant at the same time. And that's how they're recombining. So that's the very important nuance here. And this is so common with COVID that we can actually have multi-recombinant lineages. So here's an example here. A BA2 became a BA2.1 and a BA2.75. These different independent lineages then recombined in a single person to create XBB, which became a very big deal. These had split off into different lineages by infecting different chains of people, then recombined into an XDE. We also have that chronic infection that became BA2.86, which then jumped into JN1, which became dominant for the wave. And then this recombined again with this recombined XDE and Jan1 to create XDV, which then later mutated further into NB 1.8.1, which fueled a lot of our early summer wave. So like you can get it's a very common thing that can happen, getting infected with more than one COVID variant at the same time. And the problem is that we're experiencing this chronic infection to baseline infection right now again. So we're having another Jan1 instance. So we have BA 3.2, which is looking like a chronic infection case that has started to spread. There's some sublineages of it, BA 3.2.1 and BA 3.2.2. These are starting to branch off into some RE lineages. And I say this to say that we're now getting to the point where that is essentially like our BA 2.86, which was a feeder into Jan1. And we are very close to it. And all it takes is, again, a recombination with something that's very infectious, like an XFG that's in circulation right now, or with really any other variant, which can improve its fitness and its ability to evade prior immunity. Because, again, this is a very highly mutated lineage from a chronic infection that is now seems to be picking up and gaining infectiousness. So it's very likely that we are now at the precipice of another Jan1 type event where we have, which will fuel a new wave. So that's why it's relevant to current events right now, and why it's important that we monitor these things, that we identify people with chronic infections and figure out how to nip those in the bud so that we don't keep having this highly divergent lineage that pops up, garners mutations from infections with others, and then becomes a brand new, highly evasive, immune evasive, highly infectious variant that just mass infects everybody again. So that's sort of our problem right now. Now, I think that's a good stopping point. Let's pause here and then go into part 4. For part 4, we'll talk about Paxlovid rebound, and then we'll begin conversations on the post-acute infection, what happens after having active infections, so the post-acute infection phase, and then also post-COVID complications, which may lead into a conversation on long COVID and IACC, which is an infection-associated chronic condition. So these are things we'll cover in the coming video or videos.